The Media Project. Join the innovation revolution at the Black River Innovation Campus in Springfield, Vermont. Our soon-to-be renovated spaces are perfect for tech startups and creative enterprises eager to collaborate and thrive within the BRIC community. The question is, when are you making your move? Don't wait. Email us today at innovate@bricvt.org and start your journey. Again, that's innovate@bricvt.org. A little podcast correction. The hosts wish you to know that the web link for the Mountain Times is mountaintimes.info. Find our guest Stephen Box's featured essays there and much more regional news for Central Vermont. And now, enjoy the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is season 11 here at the Are We Here Yet podcast, launching in the winter of 2025. It is amazing. I just have to tell you, all of our listeners, to have come this far with the Are We Here Yet podcast, and I'm excited for yet another season. I have with me in studio my good friend Stephen Box. We met. It's one of the wonderful things that has happened since my family and I have moved to the wilds of Vermont, USA. And we met over our common cause around all aspects of housing. And so tonight, we really want to focus in on one particular aspect of, urban planning that directly affects housing and is actually in action here in our mutual city of Rutland, of course, talking about Rutland, Vermont, Central Vermont. And Stephen, how are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Talk about parking. You recently wrote an article, which will be upcoming in the Mountain Times. But we have an ongoing parking situation, a parking ban that they want to enact here in Rutland, and we're going to talk about the merits of that and what its consequences are on housing, right?
Yeah. Well, quick anecdote. My wife and I and our 3 children moved to Rutland, and we bought a home. And one thing we didn't really dig into is how much parking did the house have. But it's an old home with a driveway that doesn't even belong to us. It's actually part of the neighbor's property and our property, and it's barely a car width for a small car. And it'll take 2 deep. Anyway, so I've taken to parking on the side. You know, we live on a corner. So I've taken to parking on the side street and going in the side door. So last year, there's a winter parking ban for 121 days. Now, I'm a smart guy, right? I can tell you when there's snow and no snow. So to me, a winter parking ban is irrelevant. There shouldn't be one if there's no snow to be plowed.
Yeah.
Anyway, I park there, I get a ticket, and I do what when you get a ticket, I ignore it. And I ended up getting a second one. There were only 8 plow events in 121 days last year. The biggest winter event of the year came after the 121 days. So the ban didn't even hit the snow. It's just an arbitrary, let's start on the 1st and end on the 31st. Why not start on the 2nd? It was just arbitrary. But the thing that pissed me off is the signs aren't, the winter parking ban signs aren't posted. Apparently they were, but if you look at the 4 corners of the city with the big welcome sign and the Kiwanis and the Rotary and all the other, that would be the place to put the sign because that's where everyone thinks the welcome sign goes.
Welcome, folks. Winter parking ban between the months of.
Yeah. Anyway, that's just my little pet peeve tale. But the larger issue is that different agencies and authorities within the city all have a piece of parking, but they all have a different strategy, which is at odds with housing. And as you may recall from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the very base is housing, shelter, and parking. Wait, okay, I made the parking part up. But you would think that it's one of the primal needs of a human, the way we fight over it, as opposed to asking ourselves, wait a minute, if we're going to support housing, people are going to bring their shit, where are they going to put it?
Right.
And even there, we could get creative. Right now, as I look out my office window, I've got 30 parking spaces that I don't need. I could let the entire street park here on snow days.
You really could, literally, with your property.
Yes.
So the entire half of North Main Street, which is Route 7 here in Rutland, could park at Stephen's house.
So, because it's, my office here is at the old Mr. C's, which means it was a one time a restaurant with restaurant parking.
Yep.
Now that it's been turned into housing, I've got all this abundant parking. There was an interesting presentation by a guy who billed himself as the greedy developer. And he said, when I come to your neighborhood, the reason I put in a Taco Bell and a nail salon rather than the thing that you want is because your parking restrictions allow me to do a nail salon with 2 spaces, but they won't let me do that boutique restaurant that you all wish you had.
Right.
Because it requires X number of parking spaces. When at the same time, what if we just talk to the church and the nightclub and the ambulance? The ambulance place in West Rutland, you wouldn't believe how much parking they have because it used to be a bank.
Yeah. Well, in other words, get both strategic, selective, get pinpoint, get some precision.
Yeah.
Right. In seeking parking. There's a Rutland specific story here that's compelling. Then there's the broader discussion, which is equally as compelling about parking. You've touched upon both. We're going to hit both of these. Mm-hmm. First, let's give some factoids to because parking is one of these things in relation to housing that it's just got a lot of people talking these days. Mm-hmm. Specific to Rutland, the ban. So first off, I just want to say factually, right? There are many parts, people that live in the snow belt of the United States will understand this, not just New England. Many communities in the last, say, decade or so have switched to a selective kind of a parking ban. In other words, when there is no snow, there's no parking ban. If snow is occurring, or it's in the city I used to live in, if it's forecasted, there'll be a sort of a self-imposed deadline by the city. Like, we'll let you know by 7 p.m. in the following ways. It'll be on local TV. It'll be on social media. It'll be, X, Y, Z. And we'll let you know whether tonight there's a parking ban or not, right? Because as you mentioned, like here in Rutland last year, we had virtually no appreciable snow until spring, and then in the first 5 to 7 days of spring, we got 17 inches of snow, and there was no parking ban anyways, and we would have actually needed it to plow. So it's like, let's just say we're only going to call it when you need to, and so there's that in play. Here specifically recently, and I looked it up for us before we're recording. So this idea of a green belt ban. So listeners, you have to visualize, if you are standing in a urban or suburban, for what it counts here in a small city like Rutland, you're standing at your front door, you're looking out onto a small front lawn in a relatively dense neighborhood, right? Probably an older neighborhood of 100 to 150 years. And then you have a sidewalk beyond your front yard lawn. And then there's between the street, the curbing, right, and the actual sidewalk is this thin band of grass that nobody's sure who should mow it or, do whatever with. And some people have planted, plants there as opposed to the grass, or they let the grass grow so that the pollinators do their thing. So what our city is proposing right now is to prevent people. Apparently people will park up onto the curb to save space on the sidewalk when they're street parking, or I'm envisioning maybe that they're parking on that green belt and therefore also on the sidewalk, because a single family home that's now 3 apartments, right? We're talking about neighborhoods that never had to have any cars, that people walked to their job every day. There were no driveways, so driveways are largely improvised, right? As you described at your current residence, right? You might not even own the entirety of your driveway, which gets even more, crazy. So then if now it's a 3-4 family that used to be a single family, but it's a huge, 19th century mansion, there's no place to park. That's why the cars are going there. Right. So I wanted to set that stage, right? This greenbelt ban. What are your thoughts on the specific ban? They're saying it's a safety issue. Is that when those cars are on the sidewalk, it's a safety issue. I understand yes, particularly for those that have difficulty walking. I mean, the sidewalk is not for cars, right? So you got to do something else with the car,
Yeah.
But then there's the issue of, if you make it so difficult for people to park their car, what the hell are they supposed to do, right? Or what is the solution?
First and foremost, I'm going to go on the hierarchy of humans. I believe humans need to be able to walk and roll on a sidewalk, first and foremost.
Yeah.
Everybody, I don't care if you're driving a Mack truck, has to walk out of the house to get to the truck. So we're pedestrians first and foremost.
Yeah.
Or in a wheelchair or a walker. But we're self-mobilizing. So I really believe sidewalks are sacred. But I do think there's a clash of cultures here. And that is that we have this notion. I've received 2 letters from the city, abatement letters, because my turf lawn was over 2 inches. Really? Yes, on Baxter Street. During No Mow May, no less. But we have a clash of cultures because there was a period of time, Ozzie and Harriet, everybody had a putting green in the front yard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
My wife did a project where she did wildflowers in the front yard. They grew about 4 feet.
Yeah.
And then they die, and then they go to seed. And she wanted all the seeds, right? So she let them go and then lay down, and then she collected them all, and then she collected the seeds. We got cited. So then she said she wants an edible front yard, so she planted food. 17 citations later, because they were abatement letters, but we were growing some cool food, right?
Well, we should also say this was not in Vermont. This was in California. It's Southern California, where we have the most recent, fire problem.
Right. So, do you want people irrigating a turf lawn, which is like such a shallow root?
In a place where that's not a natural habitat for a lawn.
Right.
There is no natural habitat for a lawn.
Wildflowers were all natural, what were all indigenous, or whatever the word for that is, plants too. But anyway, what I'm getting at is, though, the clash of cultures, because that was then and this is now. And I was just in Boston. It was just amazing. I see so many little brownstones, and the steps would come right to the sidewalk. I don't see a lawn. I see a couple of potted plants. But there's a culture of these wonderful 3-story brownstones, and I called on a couple, and I thought, my God, these are great prices. Then I realized they weren't selling the brownstone.
They're selling the steps.
They're selling like a closet inside 3rd floor.
Well, Church Street, Philadelphia, same thing. Baltimore is famous for its white marble steps on the townhomes that are right on the street. It's a human scaled sort of neighborhood, dense neighborhood.
And so, and it was really wonderful. We've Boston, Montreal, we had the same experience.
Yeah.
We have a neighborhood where everybody gets a park in their front yard. Great, super, enjoy it. But in a place that actually needs housing, you have to get all these departments to stop doing silly things that are in conflict. So the Greenway ban is at conflict with what would be a more evolved strategy for moving cars. Do we move the sidewalk? Do we widen? Do we narrow? Like, if we're going to the trouble now of reconfiguring streets, and I'm all in favor of it, to slow them down like the German Wunderfs.
Yes.
If we're going to create people streets in densely populated neighborhoods where you want people to drive 5 miles an hour through this neighborhood, because there's kids, there's families, heaven forbid, oh my God, and they're walking and riding their bikes and going to the park, then it's absolutely essential that somebody grabs all these city departments and gets them together, and all these commissions, because if you go to the design review board and say, I'd like to turn this duplex into a 3-plex, right?
No.
the first question will be, how many parking spaces do you have? And my answer is none of your business. Do I have a parking plan? Absolutely. I'm going to share with the neighbors. We're going to share this space over here. Like, what's the plan is a better one than how many spaces? Because we can all plan for it. But they use it as a gatekeeping number, which is going to prevent us from increasing the density of our housing stock. And I think it's absolutely essential that the commissions get in sync, because you've got one group redoing the zoning. You've got another group that's doing design review. You've got the police that say they want the greenbelt to be illegal. That way, when people pull up, you know they're up to trouble. Like, oh my God.
How much of this do you think is a cultural issue? What I mean by that is in a densely packed city that's been a big metro for a long time. You mentioned Boston, right? There's nowhere in Boston. There's nowhere in Somerville. There's nowhere in Cambridge. Same thing down in Brooklyn and Queens, etc. On a residential street, right? I mean, it's been close to 100 years of people parking on the street. There's tons of cars. Wintertime comes is a mess, but they deal with it, right? We're just talking about, a smaller version of that, right? We have a densely packed neighborhood, but we're still living in a region that heavily relies on cars, right? Yes, long term, what we're really trying to do is create walkable, bikeable neighborhoods where people can live and work, and you can choose to have a car. Maybe you don't need to have a car. But until such time, a lot of people are working very far away from where they live, right? So there's this practical need for the car. But why is it in a small city such as ours with 15,800 people, is there such a hullabaloo over, okay, let's just make sure everybody that's a resident gets something maybe like a parking sticker to park on the street, and everybody who lives here is entitled to have a car, and you park on the street. And yes, it's messy sometimes, but as long as they're all just parking up against the curb and not parking on the greenbelt, and then we just end it there.
I think
What would be the problem with that?
I think this is an opportunity for us to be creative, and I think we're knee-jerk traditionalists as opposed to creative about the future. For example, how about if the right side of the street was good for parking during the snow season until noon, and then at 12 noon, the left side of the street's for parking. That way the guy can plow in the morning, take a lunch break, come back and plow in the afternoon. I see the same truck go up and down the street 4 times in a day, so I know they're hitting it at least twice throughout the city.
Yeah.
There's a simple solution. What are some other solutions? And so I think that we're just kind of stuck in that's how we've always done it. But the problem is we need housing, and housing includes people with stuff. By the way, here at where I'm standing, my office, it's 140 North Main Street, the old Mr. C's restaurant. And I was disappointed when the bike shop left because, how cool is it to have a bike shop, right? But 1 month after I bought the building, the bike shop just up and left. And that was like the entire, so I built 8 apartments for formerly homeless veterans. I bought a car and insured it and registered it and had the mechanics go through it and bring it up to snuff. So for $3,800, I've got a little Kia Soul.
Okay. Yeah.
IKEA. Like I went and picked it up and bought it.
And did you have to put it together?
With an Allen wrench. And there's one piece missing.
And it's made out of balsam wood. Oh, look at that, man. It's like particle board.
What are you doing, man? That's an indoor car. So I bought this car because at the end of the day, they guys got to go to the grocery store once a week.
Yeah. So you're your own internal Uber.
Yeah. I'm not going to drive them, though. But I just wanted, because one car means that 8 guys can go to the grocery store on their own schedule. I mean, they just have to talk to each other. Are you using the car? You want to go with me? It might even create some community.
Yeah, I'm glad you just said that, because that's the first thing that popped in my head was, look at what that does. You know what I mean?
Some of the intentional living communities, which I think are very interesting, some of them that are have an affinity for an ecosystem approach to an intentional community. Some of them have a van. I mean, the Amish do this too. They'll buy a van and hire a driver, and they'll just schedule it so the whole crew goes. But there's something to be said for about 12 people going to a co-op together. In terms of creating community, esprit de corps, camaraderie.
100%. Yeah.
There's nothing more isolating than getting into your single occupant vehicle, which is typically so huge you could take 12. Every morning I take 6 J1s from Okemo.
Yeah.
Every morning at 6:40, I take 6 of them over to the transit center. But when there's that many people in the car, man, it's every morning is this vibrant conversation.
Well, this is the country of the personal luxury vehicle.
Right.
Like in the 70s and the early 80s, there were no less than maybe 14. I mean, some car makers had more than one version of a personal luxury vehicle. You too can drive a huge car that only has 2 doors and really is only comfortable for 2 people. It is the size of a 5-passenger car.
Yeah. My best friend in high school had a hand-me-down 67 Mustang, which was way fun because it's the front 2 are like for sitting.
Yeah.
And then the pretendy in the back.
I had a Camaro in high school. It's the same thing. Like, they have to put these seats here because this is technically a 4-passenger vehicle. No, it's not. You can't even fit a bass guitar back there.
Let alone a drum kit and a tuba.
Yeah. Roof rack. But, to your point, there's ultimately what we're trying to do when we create a livable, walkable, bikeable neighborhood is there's this tremendous social benefit that in turn also makes that a more convenient neighborhood. I think I'm characterizing it right? That people are, required to communicate, right? And to work together, which in turn builds, positive camaraderie and all that, and better skills as far as like dealing when there's problems, right? Mm-hmm. There's an interconnectedness that naturally sort of happens that we've taken out of society with all of the tools that we have, right? But now it's almost like they were in service to the tools, right? Like the issues with parking that we're talking about is in part a conversation on, emphasizing the tools over the human beings who use them in the first place and the consequences of creating policy around that.
I think that earlier you mentioned a city where a notification would go out. And I think that this debate or discussion, I should say, over parking brings up some interesting elements that have nothing to do with parking. But in the city of Rutland, who's in charge of communications? Well, nobody.
Yeah, I'm going to say, no, let's do it. You see, you weren't supposed to say that right away. I was going to make it sort of like a game show,
Like again. So in the city of Rutland, who's in charge of communications?
I'm going to say the mayor's secretary. No. The town clerk? No. I don't know who.
Nobody. And I know this because if you look in some of the offices, we don't even have standards for what goes on bulletin boards. So you'll see old lists of aldermen because there's just nobody in charge of anything with regards to communications. That's a minor, weak example. But what I'm getting at is, if you look in the budget, there's no budget for communications, whether it's postcards, like a quarterly mailer. I will say the Department of Water and Power, or Public Works, I should say, we call it Public Works here. They do a lot because they're sending out paper bills. So they do those water purification standard letters.
Yeah, and you get a report that says how good or bad.
Another one was the lead pipes.
Yep.
A lot of communication there. So you see, we know how to communicate. We know where the humans live, but there's nothing for the fun stuff, right? So we've only got lead pipes, dirty water. Like, these are legal notifications that keep the city out of trouble. But when you talk about snow days, how cool would it be if we used reverse 911?
Right.
Where everybody gets a ping And everyone's connected to 911 except, well, I don't know about mobile phones, but Nextdoor, which is a community platform, they will actually work with the municipal authority so that you can ping the 4 quadrants separately and push notifications.
Yeah.
So has the city asked for the free Nextdoor, the free front porch?
Right.
Those are both free. Another one would be, but you see, have we even used this as an opportunity to look for some other innovative method of communicating? And the answer is no. Some neighborhoods actually engage volunteers, the noisy person.
Yeah.
Every neighborhood has one. And just sign up volunteers to be, can you be the noisy guy? What do I do? Well, when we give you the signal, go walk your dog and tell everybody there's no parking tonight.
Hello, I'm Peter Graves, and welcome to television stations of the 1980s that may or may not have existed, but probably didn't. But they might have. But I'm pretty sure they didn't. On tonight's program, it's the history of WLVIII, Channel 58. Channel 58 was located in Peru, Massachusetts, founded by car dealership owner and part-time porn enthusiast filmmaker Pat Figg. Channel 58 had come to be known for its quirky and offbeat programming that was borderline illegal. It probably would have gotten shut down if more people actually knew about it. It slipped under the FCC's radar because they thought it was just an abandoned meatpacking facility. Little did they know that it was a television station. Most people still don't know that it's a television station. For those who remember Channel 58, most have no idea what became of it. Some think it's still around. Others think they stopped broadcasting when a herd of cattle trampled the channel's transmitter. Some say it was just a crazy fever dream. Others state that WLVIII Channel 58 is part of a greater conspiracy, sort of a Mandela effect, much like Shazam starring Sinbad, The Monopoly Man's Monocle, The Berenstain Bears, or Madonna's Virginity. But one thing is for sure, it's a station that nobody remembers and will soon never forget. For the History Channel, I'm Peter Graves. Now, who wants to watch a documentary about gladiators?
So there have been casual approaches like that. There have been the reverse 911 approaches. There have even been ones where we actually invest in a system to communicate rather than just asking for free stuff. But nobody's asking for communication strategies, which, by the way, it was parking, but now it's connecting people.
Right. It's funny how that works, right? How it all leads back to these fundamentals.
Yeah.
What about the broader conversation about parking, right? You and I have talked in the recent past about the fact, like, the state of Minnesota this summer, probably, to me, this is the most encouraging example in years, where the entire state said no more parking minimums. One of the biggest detriments to more development in our municipalities, statewide, large and small, are parking minimums, both for housing and for further economic development. And particularly in our downtowns, no more parking minimums.
Right.
And they got it passed, right? Now, I am generally not a big fan of top-down approach. I believe in, a bottom-up approach, especially when it comes to municipal things. Like, in other words, if you and I and our neighbors can solve a problem within our municipality, and that's the lowest on the totem pole of power, right? Structures of political power structures, polities. That's the most direct and the lowest form for getting the job done. Then that's how we should do it, right?
Huh.
But this was an example of a top down, interestingly enough to me, that was like, that makes sense. And actually, maybe for parking, maybe statewide is the way to do it, right? Because then, it's almost like of course, it's not a magic wand, but you waved a magic wand. There's a deadline, and henceforth in this larger, territory, no more parking minimums. And for all intents and purposes, this should be fairly transformative for the state of Minnesota, right?
I think that what's interesting here is I know it's top down and it's broad, and when I think of Minnesota, I think of places I've been, and I haven't been to the hinterlands, but I don't think you need parking requirements in the wide open hinterlands of a state. I think this is really applying to the densely populated area. But I think of Hermosa Beach, which is very densely populated in Southern California. And what was happening is there were a lot of little small, cottages from the old days when it was a beach community, as opposed to now it's a really intensely populated neighborhood. And what's happening is these cabins, or cottages, the land will support a triplex. But if you have a parking requirement, you have to do a podium now. So you have to dig down, build a podium, which, by the way, is pretty nasty looking. But anyway.
Is it like because I just want to understand this. Is it like a dingbat? When you say a podium, you're digging into the ground for parking.
They're putting the house on stilts.
Yeah, like a dingbat.
Yeah, okay. So, and it's because of the parking requirement. And the general consensus is it's $30,000 to $50,000 per parking space.
Jeez.
Now, what if you built, like, for example, what if I did this 8 units here with no parking? Well, I know my audience.
Right.
So when you're in downtown Hollywood, next to a transit hub, you could build something with no parking, knowing that the people that will come to you are the ones with no cars because they use the metro. Like, cater to the audience. Another strategy is, if you're going to do 8 units, put in 4 parking spaces, and those 4 apartments pay more. Like, let the person with a car pay for it, as opposed to all of the pedestrians and cyclists in town that end up bearing the cost of developing a neighborhood where the parking requirements may or may not exceed or even meet the needs. We don't know. I have a 6-unit property here in Rutland with no parking. And guess what? I have tenants with no cars. Like,
Imagine that. Imagine that.
Yeah, people with cars don't like come and say, oh, I want to rent this place. And I say, there's no parking. And they go, well, I'll rent it. Then I'll act surprised when I find out there's no parking. It's like, they will go. Let me look at the other one. They go down the street and there's plenty of parking. Same landlord. I'm just catering to folks with, and then what amenities can I put in? Should I put in a bike rack? Should I put in a bike shed?
Right.
Like, what amenities can I put in to support the clientele, the customer, the people I'm serving? And by the way, the one with no parking, it's 1 block from the bus stop, and it's walkable to the downtown, to the market, downtown shopping district. So it's walkable to Amtrak. It's walkable to the transit station. It's walkable to the local bus that'll take them to the transit station.
How ironic. That means it's also walkable to the 600-plus car garage we have in the center of town. We have for those who appreciate our conversation on parking, the city of Rutland, Vermont, our fair city, has a 600 some odd parking garage that was built many years ago. Right in the center of the city. We have the most parking you would ever need for a city of 15,800 people for downtown parking.
Yep.
And yet it's virtually empty most weekdays.
Yep.
How come people aren't, that's a whole other podcast. How come people aren't using the parking garage and complaining that we don't have enough parking in downtown? Like, we have street parking besides that.
One thing that we haven't touched on is the fact that Baxter Street, for example, is a safer street the more pedestrian traffic there is.
Why?
Because there's more eyes on the street. Like, you can't just get away with things anymore, because it's like we should give free dogs to every neighborhood so that we had more dog walkers. Because I see the same people walking the streets, and we all know when there's something amiss.
Yeah. It's a neighborhood. It's a real neighborhood.
And so trouble doesn't want visibility. Trouble wants to be isolated, which leads into another element of this conversation, which is crime prevention through environmental design. like how much are we actually evaluating our streets and asking, is this the best use of the street? And is it the safest layout? Because sidewalks for me aren't a big deal because I'm the big guy that people are crossing the street to avoid. But are the streets, is there visibility? Is there brush that's too close to the sidewalk where someone could be behind the brush?
Yes.
So in the spirit of us getting innovative about housing, I think it's a great time to pull all these things together so that we're bringing together communication strategies for better communicating. So they're bringing together the different departments that we're all in sync, because some are actually in pursuing strategies that will make it difficult to add housing at a time where others are trying to add housing. But then public safety can't be denied.
Right.
That our streets become safer as we all talk to each other, walk the streets, look out for each other, wonder what's going on when we see something strange and amiss.
It's really true, right? Like the number one way to make a neighborhood safer is just, it's an exposed place, right?
Yeah.
And some people think, well, let you light it up, right? It's 3 a.m. and it's like daytime. Not necessarily. And the neighbors who live there every day, sleep there every night, it's not good for them. But if you've got people, like bad guys and bad girls don't want to hang out in a place where everyone's watching them do their bad thing.
And I put motion detected lights on a lot of the corners. So when someone comes around the corner, especially one place in the back by the garage, which is where there used to be activity.
Yeah.
And some folks just out of habit or left town and came back. They go back there looking for. So I've got motion detector lights that'll just pop on and poof, they disappear.
Right.
But simple solutions. But I think the larger conversation is going to really, the fundamental tension is that was then and this is now. And, as you drive down these streets where we do have lots and housing that would support, some renovation and some repurposing, because they're big and they're deep, we have to give up the notion that there's going to be all this useless space. Because to be frank, when is the last time you saw 3 children playing in a greenway saying to myself, man, this 6-foot strip of grass is just ideal for what? It's decorative and it's a commitment to the 2-inch turf lawn buffer that's completely.
Yeah. Like what are we really doing with it? Right.
Yeah. And so I think that this is also an opportunity for us to look at, when we do this, if we're taking away this little bit of green space, can we look at the lot on the corner, by the way, that has a fence around it? It's an empty lot with a fence. Why?
Right.
There's a guy in Toronto named Dave Meslin, and he's an anti-chain link fence guy. He organizes crews, and they just go in and take down chain link fencing whenever they see it uselessly applied to keep people from space. And why? There's one in Rutland, across from the park on Baxter. But why? The house, there's a couple of them. There's one on Library. Every time there's a house fire, that's a new community park. The house just, it's demoed, so let's call it a park. But there's one on Library and there's one over on, Baxter. And both of those should just put a swing in there.
Right.
Or a sand pit. So I think that, housing and public safety are 2 huge issues here in Vermont. And ironically, our parking bans, I think, could be the thread that we could tug on that would unravel all of the obstacles to increasing housing, safe and healthy housing, improving the housing stock, renovating, putting empty units back online, 240 units in Rutland City, 2,413 in Rutland County. Empty units. Why aren't they online? But the other thing is the communications, the camaraderie, the esprit de corps, the Jane Jacobs-ish benefit of people rubbing elbows and talking to each other.
The ecosystem.
Yeah, a significant impact on public safety. And you can't beat that. It's a twofer. All because we just take a look at the green belt or the winter snow ban or any of the other design review board, X number of parking spaces per X bedrooms. Like, who came up with that? And then how could we explore? Because I tried to look into zip cars. I think zip cars of Boston, or originated in Boston, if I'm not mistaken. But zip cars where they're just, like in Paris, there's bicycles, there's scooters, that you can just jump on. So mine is casual. If you want a bicycle, I'll give you a bike. And if you want to borrow the car, you can borrow the car.
Yeah.
But how could we explore some other, and maybe that's a little micro economy that could grow up here. We don't have enough for an Uber here.
Yeah, there is that in many cities of various sizes, shared bike sharing, by fee or not. Scooter sharing, I've even seen more recently or not. That's kind of interesting when there's a bunch of like Segways with a handlebar. But yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of things that have more that they're not even emerging anymore. I mean, they've been around for more than a decade or, in a decade and a half or so, and are a regular thing in a lot of other cities. Not all large cities either. There's a lot of small cities that take advantage, particularly the bike sharing thing.
Yeah.
You see that a lot.
The library here had bike share for a short spell. Morgan.
See, that's interesting. That would have been before my time here in town. So how did that go?
Not very well. There were like a few bikes, and I think they disappeared.
So they weren't part of like a bike sharing. In other words, they were trackable. They had a digital, you had to pay the fee before you took it. They were just like, we got a bunch of bikes, take it out of
the bike co-op. The bike co-op, taking them apart, putting back together, painting them as a similar color.
Okay.
And then you could check them out at the library and bring them back. So I don't know why. I didn't ask why, but they were there. Now they're not. And sometimes with experiments like this, you have to do it once, twice, and 3 times. Like, is the library the wrong place for it?
Yeah.
Like, who are the customers and where are they coming from? Would this be better off put by a school? So kids could check out a bike and ride home and then bring it back the next day.
Yep.
Maybe because that's the day they're not catching a ride on the bus. Or they want to go to their friend's house instead of home on the bus. So could they grab a bike and head out and then come back the next day? So I don't know what goes into something, but I do know that the best laid plans of mice and men often fail, succeed, because we find out what the magic mix was. And in my particular case, I don't know, maybe it'll work and maybe I'll lose my car in the first week. Life is a learning experience.
Right. You got to put something out in the marketplace sometimes to find out.
Yeah, but I did keep it in the disposable price range.
Yes, you did.
If it doesn't come back, I'm not going to be like, oh my God.
It wasn't a Bronco.
Yeah.
For $65,000 or $70,000. So the conversation we'll sort of change gears here a bit. Conversation for our listeners will continue. We have an upcoming article that we anticipate being published in the Mountain Times. The Mountain Times is a regional newspaper here in the part of central Vermont we call home. And so we want to mention those folks. Mountaintimes.com is where you can access a digital copy of that. More to come as to a date for that. I also want to mention that Stephen and I and many other folks here are sort of bringing back to life an organization that you, Stephen, had founded a couple of years ago and that you kind of want to revitalize, which is just made up of, maybe you can talk a little bit about that first off.
Well, it was out of what I perceived as a need on my part, but I thought a need on everyone's part. If we're going to welcome investors to Vermont, we need to be concierges. We need to be welcoming. We need to be informative rather than like, well, you should do your due diligence before you come give me your money. Like, what? Anyway, right. So I tried to bring together 4 groups of people. And the first one I refer to as housers, which is anybody that has anything to do with renovating, developing, managing, providing, creating, owning housing.
The community of small-scale owners, landlords, developers.
Mom and pop housers are responsible for 80% of the rental properties in the state of Vermont. Mom and pop. And I don't think mom and pop get much of a credit or support. And in fact, I would suggest that they actually get dismissed, but that's neither here nor there. The second group was the wraparound services, so I called them the wrappers, WRAPPERS. And there's 22 agencies and authorities here in town that I deal with, from Rutland Housing Authority to Rutland Housing Trust or Rutland Mental Health, Council on Aging, Supportive Services for Veteran Families. 22 of them, Homeless Prevention Center, ROC, 22 of them that have never met.
Mm.
Or at least they act like that.
And we'll be getting into other podcast episodes about that experience.
Yeah.
Too.
So that was the wrappers, but getting them in the same room, because they all call and ask if I have something available. So 22 housing advocates that are calling for housing, and then all these housers. The third group were all of the support. So we call them the supporters. Very clever. But if you think about it, realtors know everything about what's going on. Nobody ever asks them. But the thing that's missing, the secret in the mix, plumbers, electricians, right?
Yeah,
That's very short of those two. And you can't fake it with plumbing and electrical. You can't just go, well, I get some more silicone.
You can't fake things that'll either drown you or electrocute you.
There's no molding that will fix it.
No, they either work or like, hey, there's a fire.
Yeah.
Hey, there's a flood,
So we had electricians and plumbers because at the end of the day, they're also part of it. Okay? The solution. And the fourth group was the government. And we had Rutland Redevelopment Authority. We had the mayor. We had aldermen. We had representative senators. And I don't know what's left. Kings and queens. So we had the government. So we had the four groups. And we did a few different strategies. In one workshop, we all broke into groups to talk about what we do good, what we could do gooder, what we don't do so good, and what we want from the others. And so without digging into it too much, the point was, how can the four groups work together better?
Right.
That's it. And improve the quality of housing in Rutland, not just in numbers, but in, is it safe and is it healthy?
And so this grassroots sort of, we're all working together to bring this back to life and with some consistency and to bring these folks together because we care about this ecosystem. Folks like you and I came from wherever we came from, right, in the recent years, and we chose to live here, right? And we believe in this place. We believe in each other. We want. We're not afraid to. We're not shying away from talking about the stuff that really does need to improve. And at the same time, we want everybody to know, it's because we believe in this place.
Right.
But we need to address these things and we need to come together and to work together on the solution. Otherwise, it is no solution. It's most of what we're talking about. It's impossible to permanently solve some of the problems that we have without actually addressing them together.
Yeah. One other thing, I earlier, we mentioned housing and public safety, and I think the third leg of the chair that doesn't wobble is the fact that I was a little shocked on how high the taxes were in Vermont. I didn't really do my due diligence that much.
You and me, let me tell you something, you and me both. I thought, hey, look, how bad can it be? I'm coming from Massachusetts, and I owned business property in New Hampshire. Guess what?
At the end of the day, I'm going to put this out there, that if we can step away from the silly, contradictory, parking ban debates and open this conversation up to the three things that matter. Can we create more safe and healthy housing? And the answer is yes. And how do we do that? By taking a lot of these properties that are underutilized or empty and getting them back online by renovating for maximum density. Second, that's going to have a public safety impact. But the third category of impact is my taxes will go down because the grand list is blossoming. And these are the three things that people are bringing up now. If we keep going, we'll come up with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But three big ones. The chair doesn't wobble. A three-legged stool doesn't wobble. A thrice-braided cord can't be broken.
You either create new households paying property taxes, organic growth of your property, of your revenue as a municipality, or you put the screws to the same people year upon year because your costs are going up. But without new people, new households paying property taxes, money's got to come from somewhere, right?
Yep. So when I have a 1-bedroom that looks like it'll take a 2, I'll carve out a 2nd bedroom in the apartment because it's now of greater value. I'm creating value. Now,
organic growth.
Yeah, you could say, oh, look, greedy developer. Okay, no, actually, I'm creating value. And if I have a property that, like I just did it was a 3 unit, I turned it into a 4. Okay. Oh, I increased by 33% the number of units. Like, this is creating value. And yet there are obstacles that we control. And I think that we should pull on that little thread, increase housing, improve public safety, lower our taxes by creating value and spreading it out. So there's more homes, more housing, and our taxes go down.
Well said. I'm gonna conclude by mentioning that one last thing. Mountain Times, we already talked about that, but we also want to mention that coming this spring, we are engaging in a new podcast, monthly podcast, telling the compelling stories of housers in our fair city, which we believe will resonate with people all over the country, but told through the lens of those of us doing this every day here in the great city of Rutland, Vermont. I'm, of course, talking about the new podcast that we will call simply Housers.
Housers, I like it.
Housers. There it is. Stephen Box, I'm glad this is, we've gotten to know each other a little bit over the last, 4 months or so. I'm glad that we were finally able to connect and that this is our first podcast episode.
And it's been great fun.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com.